If you're looking to replace your old worn-out truck arms, Detroit Speed now offers a brand new rear QUADRALink system for the 1967 to 72 GMC 10 trucks. This kit will replace your truck arms with DSC's patented Swivel-Link technology, coil-over shocks and springs, and will lower your ride height by up to 7.5 inches. If you already have the DSC Speed Kit installed, it's actually quite easy to upgrade to the QUADRALink because of the common components. We offer this kit in a 100% bolt-on kit, or we also offer a weld-in version if you're planning on replacing your rear axle. Today we're going to be showing you how to install the bolting kit on Kyle Tucker's 1967 C10. Disconnect the rear brake line in the passenger side frame rail. Remove the clip holding the flex line to the hard line. The flex line goes to the rear axle through a hole in the upper spring perch plate bracket. Remove the flex line from the chassis. Remove the rear axle jump bumper bracket from both sides of the frame by removing the rivets from the frame rails. Remove the upper spring perch plate from the bottom side of the frame rail and crossmember. Start by removing the two rivets on the top of the frame crossmember by grinding them down. Use a punch to remove the rivets from the crossmember. Grind the holes smooth. Remove the spring perch plate by removing the two rivets on the bottom side of the frame rail. Use a punch to remove the rivets and pry the spring perch plate from the frame rail. Grind the remaining rivets down and remove them from the frame rail using a punch. Remove the factory panhard bar mount bracket on the driver's side frame rail by removing the four rivets on the bottom side of the frame rail. With the frame rails level, locate the rear edge of the frame notch location on the side of the frame. Using the factory hole in the frame rail, measure forward 10.5 inches. Mark this location. Cut out the provided frame notch template. Place it on poster board if desired. Place the frame notch template so it sits on the outside frame rail. Locate the rear edge of the template to the marked location from the previous step. Wrap the bottom of the template around the bottom side of the frame rail and tape the template in place. With the frame notch location exposed from the template, remove the template and place masking tape on the area of the frame rail. Locate the template back onto the side of the frame rail. Use the template and trace the frame notch cutout onto the side of the frame rail. Remove the template. Center punch and drill two holes in the corners of the traced lines on the frame rail to make it easier to cut around the corners of the frame notch area. Cut along the traced lines to notch the frame rail. Grind the notch area smooth to remove any burrs from the frame rail. Locate the frame notch bracket assemblies from the kit. Test fit the frame notch assembly to the frame. Trim and grind any frame rail material away if needed so the frame notch assembly fits tight to the frame rails. Once the frame notch assembly fits around the frame rails, clamp the bracket in place. Transfer punch the frame rail using the frame notch bracket assembly as a template. Center punch and drill two mounting holes above the frame notch to a final drill size of 15-30 seconds. Install two sets of provided 7/16-20 by 1 1/4 inch long hex head bolts, washers, and non-like nuts to hold the bracket assembly in place. With the bracket mocked up, you're going to want to center punch the remaining holes. Then remove the bracket and drill the frame rail to a final drill size of 15-30 seconds. DSC recommends painting or powder coating the bracket before final installation. Install the frame notch bracket assembly onto the frame rail using provided 7/16-20 by 1 1/4 inch long hex head bolts, non-like nuts, and washers. Use anti-seize on the threads of the bolts. Tighten the hardware on the outside of the frame rail first, and then tighten the bottom hardware. Torque the 7/16-20 hardware to 50 foot-pounds. Repeat these steps to install the frame notch bracket assembly on the opposite side of the truck. Install the jounce bumper into each frame notch assembly at the frame notch using provided 3/8/16 nylock nut and washer, and tighten. Remove the front bed brackets from the top of the frame rails by drilling out the rivets holding the brackets to the frame rails. Remove the rivet on the bottom side of the frame rail that goes through the frame rail reinforcement. Drill out the holes in the brackets as well as the holes left in the frame rails using a 15-30 seconds drill bit. Chamfer the holes as needed. Cut out the provided template and locate it with the two holes on the top of the frame rail at the front bed mount. Transfer punch the two holes in the template to the top of the frame rail. Remove the template and drill out these two marked locations to a final drill size of 15-30 seconds. Position the provided chassis bracket assembly to the inboard side of the frame rail. Install the chassis bracket assemblies onto both frame rails using provided 7/16-20 hardware. Tighten the 7/16-20 hardware and transfer punch the holes in the chassis bracket assembly to the frame rail. Drill the 10 marked hole locations on the frame rail to a final drill size of 15-30 seconds using the chassis bracket as a template. Install the chassis bracket assemblies onto both frame rails using provided 7/16/20 hardware. Use anti-seize on the bolts. Reinstall the front bed mount using the hardware back into its original frame location. The hardware will pass through the bed mount, frame rail, and chassis bracket assembly. Tighten the hardware and torque to 50 foot-pounds. Install the track bar chassis mount bracket on the driver's side of the frame rail. There are 4 holes on the outboard side and 4 holes on the bottom side to mount the bracket. Install the provided 7/16/20 by 1 3/4 inch long hex head bolts, washers, and nylon nuts into the 4 holes on the bottom side of the track bar mount and frame rail. Use anti-seize on the bolts. Leave the hardware loose for now. The driver's side upper shock mount bracket will also be installed where the track bar bracket is installed on the outboard side of the frame match bracket. There are 2 different height options to install the upper shock mounts. Detroit Speed recommends using the bottom hole locations in the bracket for a lowered ride height. Locate the upper shock mount assemblies to the outboard side of the frame rails towards the rear of the frame match brackets. Make sure you have the correct upper shock mounts on the correct side of the frame rail. The weld-in upper shock mount bushing will be towards the rear of the truck. Install the upper shock mounts with the provided 7/16/20 by 1 1/4 inch hex head bolts, nylon nuts, and washers that were included in the frame match bracket kit. Use anti-seize on the bolts. Torque the hardware to 50 foot-pounds. Identify the lower axle bracket assemblies. The passenger side assembly will have the track bar mount. This assembly will locate on the trailing arm axle mount. Place the provided 5/8 18 by 3 5/8 by 4 1/2 inch long U-bolt around the axle tube through the trailing arm mount and the lower axle bracket assembly. Use anti-seize on the U-bolt. Tighten the U-bolt evenly using provided 5/8 18 prevailing torque nuts. Place one of the provided upper axle bracket assemblies around the top of the axle tube so it lines up with the inboard section of the passenger side lower axle bracket assembly. Place 4 of the provided 1/2 inch 20 by 3 inch long hex head bolts and AN washers through the upper axle bracket weld tubes and through the lower axle bracket weld tubes. Use anti-seize on the bolts. Tighten the 2 axle bracket assemblies by placing the 1/2 inch 20 nylon nuts and AN washers on the threads of the bolts and tighten. Torque the hardware to 60 foot-pounds. There are 2 mounting hole locations in the chassis brackets. DSE recommends using the top set of mounting holes for the lower links and the bottom set of holes for your upper links. This will be your nominal setting for a lowered ride height. Install the lower Swivel-Link into the chassis brackets and the rear axle brackets. The longer set of links will be installed outboard of the frame rails with the provided M14 by 2.0 by 90 mm hex head bolts, washers, and flange lock nuts. Use anti-seize on the bolts. Do not torque at this time. There are 2 mounting hole locations in the lower link axle brackets. DSE recommends using the top set of mounting holes as this will be your nominal setting for a lowered ride height. Install the upper Swivel-Links into the chassis brackets and the rear axle brackets. The shorter set of links will be installed inboard of the frame rails using provided M12 by 1.75 by 90 mm hex head bolts, washers, and flange lock nuts. Use anti-seize on the bolts. Do not torque at this time. Install the track bar Swivel-Link into the track bar axle bracket and then into the track bar chassis mount. Use the provided M14 by 2.0 by 80 mm hex head bolts. The middle hole in the track bar chassis bracket is the nominal setting for a lowered ride height. Thread the provided M14 by 2.0 flange lock nuts on the end of the track bar bolts. Use anti-seize on the bolts and tighten. Check the axle position in the truck and adjust the links as necessary. The rear axle should be centered from side to side by adjusting the length of the track bar. It can be adjusted by loosening the jam nut and turning the track bar. When doing the final wheelbase adjustment on your 1967 to 72 C10 truck, you can use the lower Swivel-Link to make that adjustment. The measurement for a short bed is 115 inches and a long bed is 127 inches. There can be no more than 2 inches of exposed thread on the end link, giving you 3/4 inch of thread engagement, and this does not include the jam nut. Confirm the rear axle position again and double check that all the bolts and jam nuts are tightened. Verify that the track bar is installed into the hole that places it closest to horizontal. You cannot torque the Swivel-Link and track bar hardware to 100 foot-pounds while the truck is at ride height. Assemble the shocks and springs. Lower the rear axle. Install the provided 3/4 inch OD by 1 inch long upper shock spacer onto the provided 1/2 inch 20 by 3 1/2 inch long hex head bolt. Position the body side of the shock up to the upper shock mount. Apply anti-seize to the threads and install the bolt and spacer through the upper shock mount hole and through the monoball of the shock. Install the provided 1/2 inch 20 nylon nut onto the bolt. Install the provided 3/4 inch OD by 1 1/4 inch long lower shock spacers onto the provided 1/2 inch 20 by 4 inch long hex head bolts. Adjust the height of the rear axle and install the lower shock bolts and spacers through the lower shock mounts and through the monoball of the shocks. Apply anti-seize to the threads of the bolts and install the provided 1/2" 20 nut nuts. Tighten the upper and lower shock bolts and then torque the hardware to 60 foot-pounds. We hope this video gives you a little insight on how to install the Detroit Speed QUADRALink on your 1967 to 72 GMC 10 trucks. If you have any questions, please call us at 704-662-3272, or you can send us an email at tech@detroitspeed.com. Don't forget to like and follow us on social media, and you can also visit our website at detroitspeed.com. Thanks for watching.